Hi everybody and welcome to Moses Coulee. It's late July, it's early in the morning, Sunday morning, quite hot already. Thank you for joining us. I'm with Joel Gombiner today. You see Joel right there. He's finished a PhD at the University of Washington under John Stone and Brian Atwater. And Joel continues to think about megafloods down here through Moses Coulee. Today we are in the mid-Moses Coulee, which is the portion of Moses Coulee where I'm most confused typically. There's not a huge canyon. Instead, there's a plexus of individual channels, and Joel's going to give us some individual thinking about these channels and potentially tying in with Brett's work. Thanks for joining us. Let's get started.
There's not a well-defined canyon here.
Okay.
There's just a zone of flood-stripped basalt, anastomosing channels, bedrock remnants, little gravel bars tucked in, and it's pretty complex topography we're looking at here.
So clearly flood scabland, but this midsection of Moses Coulee is not this deep single canyon. What are we thinking about today then, and why are we out hiking in this? It's already hot, man. It's not even 8 o'clock.
Well, it's cooler than yesterday.
Cooler than yesterday, okay. So you camped here last night?
Yeah.
Nice. So yeah, what is, thanks for being up for this, but what's the plan? What are you interested in?
The objective today is the erosional history of this section and the deepening of the middle part due to flood erosion. And we're going to be looking not in the part that was deepened, but next to the part that was deepened for deposits relating to when the valley was higher and then when the valley was lowered. The valley floor was lowered.
So the skyline where we're kind of headed toward, terrible grammar, is that a mature pre-glacial landscape? For sure?
For sure.
That's
I don't know quite how high the water got on that slope during the floods, but it certainly didn't get to the top. So the idea is that slope has been there for a long time, and what's been changing is the middle of the valley that was lowered during clearly one set of flood events during the last glaciation.
Yeah.
And the big question that you've been thinking about and that a lot of people have been thinking about for a long time is, what about erosion and floods during prior glaciations several 100,000 years ago?
Good. Hey, how about we walk to this next point? You can put your glasses back on if you want.
Getting blinded out here.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm reading all this old Brett stuff and recently discovered some of his notebooks, and we'll talk about that, I guess. But you must have gone back to read in detail the Brett's work from the 1920s as you were working on your dissertation, or not?
Yeah, multiple times.
Okay.
Yeah. Am I going to be quizzed on it?
No, you're not.
It's on page 835.
But I was, I guess, shocked, and I'm continued to be shocked that he had this pre-Wisconsin flooding story, and yet I thought that all the boulders that you and others have dated with exposure dating is Wisconsin in age. So there seems to be a disagreement right off the bat as far as,
yeah,
Yep.
There is. There's not much evidence left of anything older than the last glaciation, in part just because stuff doesn't last on the landscape. I mean, you look at the granite boulders that are 20,000 years old, and a lot of them are turning to dust and starting to break apart. So, it could be that the older iceberg transported boulders are just disintegrated and weathered away, or they may have just been swept away by the last floodwater. So it's not surprising that most of what we see on the surface relates to the last thing that happened. It's pretty hard to find something that survived an episode of mega flooding.
Excellent.
And that's why we're going to be looking outside of where the most intense erosion was to try to find something that can tell us about what was happening in the zone of intense flooding and erosion.
Well, right. If we're in the guts of this intense scabland, I mean, this is not the main coulee of Moses Coulee, but yet there's intense work in here. Yeah, you're saying we're not going to find a bunch of old stuff down where the youngest water was cruising.
No.
We got to get to the margins. We get to the edges and find some stuff that survived.
That's right.
Okay, one more kind of establishing set of thoughts, and then we'll get into what you want to do today. So we're looking towards, I think those are the Beasley Hills, is that correct? Ephrata's kind of roughly on the other side.
Yep.
And the viewers, you remember me thinking about the talus along the walls of lower Moses Coulee. That's down around the corner. So this floodwater is taking a, well, Joel can tell us, he's been thinking about this for a decade. This water's
going this way,
making a hard right essentially, and finding its way into the lower Moses Coulee and creating that idea. And Brett's had this Spokane flood, not the most recent glacial time. We can kind of keep playing with that, but from my thinking, just from that video and as I continue to read Brett's, I'm imagining that this is Wisconsin water in here, down low, kind of inset. And then once we get up and out of the inset area, we're getting into potentially Spokane time. Is that appropriate even for up here, since we're not in the lower Moses Coulee?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's an idea that we're testing.
We're testing.
We don't know that.
Yeah.
But that's the idea, is that the first time a flood came through here, the floor of this valley was much higher. It was probably on the surface we're standing on, and the flood erosion therefore was higher on the landscape. And as time went on, the floods ate down into the landscape, and then they abandoned those higher levels as they carved out lower topography to flow through. So the older stuff is higher up, and the lower down we get, the younger the flooding is.
I mean, Brett's work 100 years ago was so pleasing to me because it was such a simple story. One old event, Spokane, one younger event, less impressive, Wisconsin. We're testing that, but we're also thinking we could have 2 or 3 or 4 older flood events through here. It doesn't have to be just one Spokane flood.
Or zero.
Or
it's
zero
all,
older.
All during the last glacial.
Or it's all Wisconsin.
I'm not convinced yet that we have any conclusive evidence in here of something that's pre-20,000 years ago.
Except for your Coyote Creek calcrete thing.
That's a gravel that could be a stream gravel from rainfall flooding.
So maybe not even that calcreted, overprinted cobble stuff.
That's ambiguous.
Okay.
What that gravel, what type of flood deposited that gravel.
This is great. Thank you for playing. So we're here to look at alluvial fans. That's kind of a surprise.
You told them about talus, which is a slope deposit, a gravity-driven process where material falls downhill, typically dry.
Yep.
And an alluvial fan is also a slope-driven process, but in this case, it's wet. So these are flash flood events where you get heavy rain on a slope. The rain mobilizes sediment, which collects in a channel, and you get sediment-laden floods or even debris flows coursing through steep channels, and where those channels open out into a valley floor or some kind of unconfined space, they drop their load, and that's where an alluvial fan forms. So they're basically flash flood deposits. And obviously we're in a really dry landscape, but occasionally, particularly in late spring or early summer, you can get extremely heavy rain out here. And you can see there's lots of loose material on the landscape. Here we can see a scarp or a cliff. Yeah. And then there are these green below that. The cliff is kind of brown and tan.
Okay.
And then there are green fan-shaped deposits where those channels come across that cliff. So
Okay,
can you see what I'm talking about?
In my own words, let me try. So this
Yeah.
is subtle, obviously. This is not in your face Moses Coulee stuff, you know, hanging valleys come in from the side, incredible relief, you know, right? So
These are minor features.
These are minor features, but
Yeah.
at this point,
That's all we have.
that's all we have. Like Brett's is zooming through 100 years ago. It's like, But, and for all I know, if we crack open his notebook in a few minutes, we're going to see him talking about alluvial fans too. But
He does, yeah.
does he?
Yeah.
But yes, this is a subtle story. So in my own words, what I think I heard Joel just say is that we have a stair step. Get my finger in here. A stair step right here. And we're going from the top of the stair step down to the next stair step. And zooming in on that, we can see that there's some light green aprons of stuff on the lower stair step. Those are some alluvial fans. We're going to look over Joel's shoulder in a bit at his phone where he's got this stuff mapped out. And presumably there's similar aprons of alluvial fan material up on top of the step as well.
Yeah, and that's kind of the question. And so the lower ones are on a surface that's clearly flood eroded.
Yeah.
I mean, we can look at that and see all the scabland out there. So that level, that lower stair step, didn't exist before that flood erosion happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So those alluvial fans have to be younger than the erosion that created the surface that they're on.
So before we go any further, we're talking about alluvial fans. You're not saying that the floods created the fans.
No, I'm saying that the rainfall floods
Yes.
create these fans.
Much smaller, localized floods of water from a rainstorm.
Yes, but the fans are on levels that were created by the floods.
Excellent. Last thing, and then I'll turn the phone off. Can we look at your phone over your shoulder?
Yeah.
So you noticed some things online
So
and made some relationships back home, and then you're like, I want to go out and see this stuff for real, right?
So the process here is going into Google Earth and tracing landforms.
Okay, let me come
So all these colored blobs on here are hand-drawn polygons by me, drawing boundaries around what I think are landforms.
Cool. You've been busy, Joel.
Yes, some of this is new, some is old. And the red ones are what I think are possible higher alluvial fans. And then these tan colored ones are the lower ones that I'm pretty confident about. So the general process is create a map on Google Earth or on GIS that's basically a hypothesis, and then come out into the field and look at the actual material and combine those two sets of observations to create an interpretation about the landscape.
Sounds familiar. That's what we did in the Mansfield.
That's
Canyon
what we've
last
been
year.
doing. Yeah. And bring Nick along. So it's more fun.
Well, it's a new way to do field work. You're not the only one doing it
That's what
this
Brett's
way.
did. He looked at a topographic map and he said, that looks weird, right? He looked at the topographic map of Potholes Coulee,
Yeah.
and that was his entry point into the scabland, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was the same. I mean, the topographers were the ones who went out there
Mm-hmm.
and actually made the field observations to make that map, but it's the same kind of process of starting with a map and then letting that lead you. It's a cycle. He created new maps based on his field observations, added those to the topographic map. So we're doing the same kind of cycle of field, map, back and forth.
Well, you're right. That famous story about him noticing in the University of Washington's library this brand new Potholes Coulee topo map in 1910 or something makes me wonder, before he started doing field work in 1922 earnestly out here, how many quads he had. I wonder if there was just a couple. Like, I know if Seems like I've already run into the idea that he was doing some basic topo mapping along. Do you have a sense of that?
I don't. No idea.
Makes me curious.
Yeah.
But yes, at least that one quad.
One.
That's the famous story.
That's
so you're
the entry
totally
point.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
The scarp is a flood cut scarp.
Flood cut scarp.
That's the change in base level.
So it's not an earthquake that lowered this floor. It's a
mega flood.
It's a mega flood
Yep.
that stripped stuff away
Yep.
to get us lower than that surface over here.
Yep. And we walked up onto this. We walked up off of a flatter surface, and we're on the toe of the fan.
Toe of the fan.
Edge of the
so we're on stuff
fan
that
here.
got washed down through this notch onto this lower surface. And these are the looks of the cobbles. Now, are you surprised by anything? What could you do with a deposit like this?
Not much. But I'm just looking at this mound here, and wondering if this is sort of a debris flow lobe that we're on, or whether there's a little knob of bedrock under here that the fan is filling in around.
Oh, our little knob here might have a bedrock core to it.
That's what I was wondering.
Right, I see. But the blocks are angular. It's not like this is a bunch of river gravel or something.
No.
So it makes sense that this is what an alluvial fan deposit should look like, right?
Yeah.
But somebody's watching and go, oh, come on, these guys don't know what they're doing. How could they see anything? Again, you've already mapped this from above. You've seen these lobate patterns on your
These are
imagery.
These are fans. I sent you the image.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
You were convinced.
All right, there's some big blocks in here.
Some big blocks. So is this? I mean, this has the look of an old
core.
bedrock thing that's been buried by the fan.
Now, you wouldn't expect to see a bunch of exotic stuff in this if this came down that gully since the last mega flood, right? It's just coming from here.
Right.
This is a local story.
It should be all basalt, and it should be all after the last flood. I could have dropped any erratics in here.
And yet I'm going to push you now. It's probably inappropriate. If the fans that are up on top of the step are pre-Wisconsin alluvial fans, and then we have Wisconsin floodwater coming through here, not only carving and making this lower bench, but the water is deep enough to get those upper alluvial fans wet. We could find some iceberg rafted
Could there be an erratic
exotics up there?
Sure.
Where have you found your exotics? You started your PhD simply
in here,
looking for exotic boulders and erratics and getting age dates on them, correct?
Yeah, so to make sure I was back on, in Moses Coulee, I've found them like this, just aimlessly walking around.
Yeah.
But the majority of them are in, they're in side valleys that come into Moses Coulee. So if you imagine a trough and a flood coming across it in an iceberg with a keel, I think a lot of the icebergs got stuck in valleys like Coyote Creek, which is not really visible over there, right? But it's over there.
But like if I'm zooming way over to the Beasley Hills, and I'm looking at these pre-glacial drainages coming down into this area, that's a classic spot where you have found iceberg rafted boulders from the north?
No. I haven't worked on those slopes, but I have not found any there. I haven't looked there. But they're not that common. We haven't seen one today. And we've been walking on terrain that's clearly had floods with icebergs traversing it. I found one or two up on that surface where we started.
What kind of lithologies, just in general, have you found with these ice-rafted erratics in Moses Coulee?
You find the granitic rocks and quartzites.
Quartzites?
I'd say the interesting ones, though, are the metamorphic rocks.
Okay.
So you find some schists, this rock, a pretty distinctive rock, Augen gneiss, giant feldspar crystals in it, and then some of the quartzites. You think of quartzite as just being 100% quartz, but some of the quartzites have garnet in them, and I think that's significant because the big question out here is obviously, is there water from Montana coming here? And the diagnostic tracer for water from Montana is rocks from the Belt supergroup, which is a low-grade metasedimentary rock.
Yep.
Doesn't have garnet in it. So seeing the quartzite with garnet in it tells me that's a quartzite from a higher grade metamorphic province, not from the Belt supergroup. And then the other thing is that so far the absence of any Belt argillite, which has a distinctive look to it and which has been found in the Willamette Valley, at Rattlesnake Mountain.
Yes.
And so finding it in here would be a direct line to Montana. Not finding it in here is a reason to keep searching for more erratics, but the more we search and the more we don't find it, and the more we find these higher grade metamorphic rocks, the more it points to different provenance that's not the Belt supergroup. It's not Montana.
It's not Montana, so where's the water coming from?
We've already been through this. It's coming from the Okanagan, from the north.
From the north.
Yeah.
Thank you. So back to the other thought, like some of the giant flood bars that Brett's was describing 100 years ago are typically naked. They typically don't have huge sage on them because the porosity between those clasts is so big that those tap roots can't get any water.
So it depends on the facies of gravel in the bar.
Okay.
So the one we were looking at this morning at the bottom of Olson Road is more of just a pile of marbles. Some of the bars have diamixed mixtures of silt and gravel.
Okay.
That are, here's another little channel. We need to get the lidar out here. So probably subaqueous debris flows during the floods. So I mean, the gravel bars are not all, they're not all one material. Some of them are cleaner, more sorted gravels. So like looking across there, that's one where you see how that
blonde
surface really stands out.
Shazam!
Everything around it.
That's a flood bar.
And so that tells you right away that's there's got to be some reason for that.
Oh, that's sweet.
And that's because it's a cleaner, more sorted gravel, and the water just drops right through it.
Oh, I love that. So I'm saying marbles, but like what's the average class size in something like that, just off the top of your head? Is it truly like
cobbles and small boulders?
Okay.
Yeah. Anything from coarse sand and pebbles all the way through to small boulders.
So an average of like softball sized. You got a pile of softballs.
Cobble gravel.
Yeah. And that water's just you can't hold water in a pile that's 50 feet high or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. What do you think, Brett? What do you think about Brett's talking about this talus accumulation business, and that it's the 2/3 the way up the wall of this talus in Lower Moses Coulee is talus that's been untouched by younger floods? Does that ring true to you at all?
So let's go through the idea again that I thought part of the idea was that he saw more talus, or talus covering a higher percentage of the slope.
Yeah.
In Moses Coulee versus Grand Coulee. Is that what you're getting at, or?
I think he saw the same thing in Lower Grand Coulee, but he was just seeing vertical coulee walls and measuring roughly the height of those talus slopes and somehow keeping track of time by how much talus had accumulated there. I mean, I know you had that concept, but I just don't get why.
The way I think of it is that the slopes were 100% cleaned off during the last glaciation.
Right.
And then since then, a talus apron has been accumulating. And it may have I don't know if it's a steady process over time.
Okay.
It may do most of the adjustment pretty quickly and then more or less stabilize.
I think that's what his critics were saying.
And
but
he was
I
saying,
guess where I am right now is thinking, like, I really want to think hard about a Spokane flood with Spokane talus, but to make that work, at least in Lower Moses Coulee, and I guess Lower Grand Coulee as well, to finish my thought, like, I think he's saying that the Wisconsin floods are minor and that you're truly not getting deep water during the Wisconsin time into this coulee.
so he envisions talus surviving the Wisconsin episode of flooding.
High and dry, I think.
I mean, how does that work? Even if the water is lower, it's then going to create a scarp in the talus and undercut it, and that higher talus is now going to be unstable and will collapse down. Does that? How do you? I mean, I guess if the flooding is extremely minimal, but
well, that's the question for me. Like, why don't we have trim lines for these? We don't have that, do we? Like at Rattlesnake Mountain, you've got erratics up to a certain elevation, therefore you know how high the water was at any point in the time. Do we have that in Moses Coulee?
Yeah, I mean, I have erratics that imply that have been dated with 18,000 years ago.
Okay, Wisconsin.
And they're at a level that requires like 2 million cubic meters per second of water.
How high?
Where we started today.
No shit.
1860 feet. And so that means that this entire basin had to be filled with water. And unknown is what the floor of the basin was like at that time. So one possibility is that the floods that got up there occurred when less of this had been eroded. So there's less space to fill with water. But even so, I mean, we're in such a wide part of the basin.
Right.
Even with that inner channel not yet cut,
yeah,
you still need a mega flood to get water up on that surface.
Up on that surface 18,000 years ago.
18,000, yeah.
And those are dates that Brett's didn't have, obviously.
Yeah. So that's why I have trouble with this idea of a wimpy little flood that preserved a bunch of talus during the last cycle.
Interesting.
So
very interesting.
Sorry, Brett.
So as we're walking over to this next little outcrop, Joel and I, let me just take a moment and say, there's a guy named Ryan in Springfield, Illinois, who took a whole day, drove up to Chicago, got onto the campus of the University of Chicago, took his iPhone, found the library where J. Harlan Bretz's journals were stored, got permission from the librarian to take photos of the field notes from 1922 and 1923 and other summers as well. But I'm only up to those 2 field seasons. And Ryan sent the PDF of journals from Brett to me. I've put those on my website. I want everybody to get a chance to read directly from J. Harlan Bretz's notebooks. As far as I can tell, nobody has seen those notebooks besides a couple of researchers. So it's a big moment, and we're going to read from Bretz's notebooks, 1922 and 1923, and when he was here and other places. So all I can do is say thank you to Ryan in Springfield, Illinois. So it's Sunday morning. Shall we read from our hymnal? I printed out what Ryan was able to get from the University of Chicago. It's J. Harlan Brett's field notes from the summer of 1922. First field day is August 1st, 1922. And I'm just getting started with this stuff. I've highlighted all the places. I've put in the margins the locations generally. And I emailed this to a few geology buddies, including Joel. So Joel has seen some of this, at least scanned it briefly. So, I don't know. Joel and I are just going to riff. Is your mic on, by the way?
Nah, it should be.
Okay. Steamboat Rock. This is just 1 month in 1922. All right. Whatever you want to say, let's go for it. August 22nd and 23rd, 1922, J. Harlan Bretz and 3 grad students. Broad tributary valleys eroded in basalt but little altered by glaciation lead southward to Moses Coulee from a latitude a few miles south of Mansfield. The coulee itself begins not more than 5 miles south of Mansfield. These tributary valleys are members of the pre-Coulee drainage system, pre-glacial course, and probably first cycle. The broad floor of the main valley of the older system is easily recognized as far down as the first lake. Coulee is entrenched in it. So right off the bat, he's talking about a pre-Wisconsin signature for that area south of Mansfield.
Yeah, that part is really interesting to me. I wish he had a map so I could see what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the thing I've been chasing, is what are the channels that feed into Moses Coulee?
Yeah. And
he makes it sound like it's pretty clear, and there's a tributary system. In my mapping, it looks more like an anabranching system, rather than, when he says tributary, that makes me think dendritic, and he says that it's little altered by glaciation.
Yeah.
I mean, I see those, if we're thinking of the same area, I see those valleys as heavily altered, if not carved entirely, by subglacial meltwater. That being said, I kind of think I can picture what he's talking about in terms of some tributaries. So
let's keep
it
going.
makes me want to look back at the topography and try to see what he saw there.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's the key here, I think, is my instinct is the same thing. Go to a few of these key places if I clearly know where he was, and try to see what he was able to see.
But that passage you just read was the most interesting part to me, because it's the most interesting question of Moses Coulee.
And apparently it's the first day he was ever in the area.
Yeah.
All right, let's try a couple more paragraphs at least. He's got 5 pages just to Moses Coulee itself. Yeah. At the Sunset Highway crossing near the old post office of Spencer. Now I got to figure out where Spencer is, or Spencer was.
Never heard of that.
A glimpse of the moraine on the summit of the cliffs to the north can be obtained, but the moraine in the valley is around a curve and cannot be seen.
Okay.
A gravel pit along Sunset Highway on the east slope of the coulee.
Yep.
The gravel is wholly of basalt and very little rolled. The bedded strata dip up the valley. What? There's bedding going up the valley? In a deposit within Moses Coulee? I'm panning into your face now.
Yeah, so there's gravel bars. So
Oh, like an eddy thing?
There's eddy bars.
Okay.
Way up in there.
Got it.
I don't know if that's what he's talking about. Because those are, he said little worked, right?
Little gravel is wholly basalt and very little rolled.
Little rolled, right.
The bedded strata dip
what
up
he
the
means
valley.
is angular. I assume he means the gravel's angular.
Yes. Clearly only a fine talus or alluvial fan gravel. On the west slope of the coulee, we're still at Sunset Highway, Highway 2, the highway ascends over a long debris slope which leads down from a hanging tributary. The material above the level of the Wisconsin Valley train is usually basalt and not much worn. The material above the level of the Wisconsin Valley train. If this were a simple debris cone or fan, the matter would be trifling enough. But two features about it are puzzling: its size and its relation to the coulee walls and the post-Wisconsin talus. One, about its size. It's 2 miles long and in width averages about 2/3 the total width of the valley. Its surface along the west wall is flat. He's talking about the Moses Coulee Bar, right? At Highway 2, at US 2.
Okay.
Its surface along the west wall is flat. This passes eastward onto a convex curve, descending to the Wisconsin outwash flat.
Okay, yeah.
But the flat upper surface is 100 feet above the outwash flat. The flat upper surface appears to have been built alongside vertical rock walls. Only post-Wisconsin talus of usual proportions intervene between the wall and the flat. He's got a sketch. I'm leading to something, I promise. The fill is older than the Wisconsin glaciation, for it's obviously but a terrace remnant of a once continuous valley fill, and the Wisconsin outwash lies in the valley eroded in it. So here we go. That's our connection to what we're doing today. I know he's talking about a few miles further north, but isn't that what we're thinking about today?
Similar.
The fill is older than the Wisconsin glaciation, for it's obviously but a terrace remnant of a once continuous valley fill. And the Wisconsin stuff's in the middle, down lower. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, but now he's got questions. Yet the talus has not been accumulating on its upper flat from the bounding western cliff any longer than it has been in contact with the east wall and Wisconsin terrace. Question: did Wisconsin waters sweep this older feature clean? Did they erode the 100-foot valley in it? Otherwise, how do you explain the talus of the same age on it and on Wisconsin outwash?
So he's not allowing for the possibility that that gravel bar and the Wisconsin outwash were deposited more or less the same time.
Right.
Which I think is what we now think.
Right.
Within a couple thousand years of each other.
Because of the surface exposure dating. Is that the only reason we've decided it's all the same generation, more or less?
And just the look of the weathering on the gravel. Just the freshness of it. So, because he's struggling with how there could be the same amount of talus on the outwash and on top of. And it's also interesting, he's thinking of the gravel bar not as a aggradational bar form, but as an erosional form into a former valley fill. And that's one of the puzzles, I think, with a lot of the gravel bars, especially the ones in the Columbia River, is, are they dissected valley fills or are they constructional bar forms? But he later would call that, what he's here is calling a valley fill that was dissected. I think he later calls a giant bar. So I wonder where that would be this, because this is what we would now call the Great Bar, or the Highway 2 bar.
Yeah.
But here he's thinking of it as a valley fill, which is different from a bar. he's thinking that gravel filled the entire valley.
From the side? Like we're thinking about right now?
It doesn't sound, well, is that what he's saying?
I don't know.
Or he's just saying, he just calls it a debris filling.
I think at some point he calls it Spokane flood bar, but
Okay.
maybe not now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well I can't stop.
All
Now,
right.
now I'm into the colored pens. All right, so red is Wisconsin and blue is the Spokane. It is, this is day 2 of being here. It is clear then that the waters from the pre-Wisconsin glaciation swept down across this area in great volume, found no definite well-cut stream valley, spread out widely, and initiated a large number of incipient channels. As these deepened, the more favorably situated ones deepened at the expense of the others and drew off the waters into them. Before this Spokane flood ceased, at least 500 feet of erosion in the basalt has been accomplished in the lower part of the tract. Such vigorous currents left no gravel deposits. All courses were swept clean. Only in the broad, simple canyon portion above and below this tract could gravel be deposited. It is clear that the pre-Wisconsin ice must have advanced at least as far as Mansfield in order to discharge into the Coulee, subglacial flow in other words. The Wisconsin-Okanagan lobe has destroyed all evidence of this earlier glaciation north of this area. So basically, you and Jerome are writing a paper arguing for subglacial flow, dumping into this coulee and cutting a majority of the history of this coulee. And that's what Brett's was saying in the 20s.
Yeah. I mean,
so we're back to Brett's.
Many people. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And my question remains, in the 1950s, which I haven't read carefully yet, I know he starts talking about the glacial Lake Missoula as a source, but is he specifically saying the subglacial thing is wrong? Or is he just adding Missoula as a source late in the game?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not familiar with anywhere that he really pushes for subglacial water sources.
Every paper in the 1920s he is.
But is it a focus of the paper, or is it some sort of an afterthought, or a...
He keeps saying, I don't know where the water's coming from.
Right.
He's saying, despite that, I'm mapping and remapping these channel heads.
Yeah.
Especially over by Spokane.
Mm-hmm.
And I have the ice margin right there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in a few places he's specifically saying it's coming directly from the ice. The water's coming directly out from underneath the ice.
Right.
So, and he knew about Glacial Lake Missoula in the 1920s as well. That wasn't a discovery that came later. So, you know, I think he was working pretty hard to have that subglacial story work. And then again, in the 1950s, he decides to focus on Missoula, but I don't know if that necessarily means we have to get away from the subglacial thing entirely, or if he really got away from it as well.
I just find it a little bit, so, I mean, here he's talking a little bit about sources of water. Spill from the Spokane pre-Wisconsin ice directly.
Yeah.
No lake or notable diversion. What do you think he means by that?
No lake or notable diversion.
Do you think that means no Lake Missoula or notable diversion of the Columbia River?
I think he's talking about a local lake. I don't think he's never mentioning Missoula in any of these papers before 1930.
That doesn't. Contribution direct from the ice. This is where I get a little confused. 4, entrenchment in floor by Spokane spillage, or possibly by Okanagan (Wisconsin spillage). So does Okanagan.
His usage here, anytime he mentions Okanagan, he means Wisconsin.
He means Wisconsin. So what does Spokane spillage mean? Does that mean the Columbia River spilling into Moses Coulee?
Anytime he uses the word Spokane, he means the Spokane ice sheet producing the Spokane flood.
And is that a Spokane? It seems like Spokane is being used in opposition to Okanagan.
It is. Well, I think his verbiage, maybe I'm reading too much into it,
Okay.
is that at least in these first couple papers, he's got two generations of ice.
Right.
A Spokane ice sheet, which he only calls Spokane ice sheet, with a Spokane flood, and then the younger ice sheet, which is Okanagan and or Wisconsin, same idea.
I see. So Okanagan here is an age.
Yeah, yes.
To some degree.
It's maybe just that first paper.
Okay.
Although here he is in the next summer, 1923. The surface of the basalt in the syncline north of Badger Hills, that's where we are.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Spokane scabland. It's not a Wisconsin scabland, according to him in 1923. Very deeply trenched by several great canyons, those of the three cataracts constituting only a part of the group. He's mainly talking down by Billingsley's.
Mm-hmm.
And Spokane talus everywhere except the deeper canyons. The conclusion that Wisconsin waters did but little in the Moses Coulee plexus is amply sustained by this year's reexamination. So he came back the following year, 1923, exactly 100 years ago now, to double check that he was right, that the Wisconsin signature is only in the deepest entrenched part.
Well, I'm gonna beg to differ from Jay. Sorry, man.
Harley, I wish you were here to defend yourself.
Yeah.
Tell me again why.
I mean, a couple things. One, today, for example, we saw the differing character of weathering on the higher outcrops of basalt here versus everything down there.
Yeah.
So that to me speaks to a different generation. And then it's the age of the deposits, including the erratics, implying this entire surface was underwater during the last glaciation. Could it have existed and then been modified? Yeah, but I think it was eroded and freshened based on the look of the eroded basalt compared to older, higher stuff, and based on the last glacial age of the deposits in that tract. So I would love to see what he's seeing, but I'm still not quite getting it.
Mm-hmm.
So he can look at talus and say that this is Spokane talus and this is Wisconsin talus.
Not because the talus looks any different physically, but the position, the elevation, and the walls of which they're associated.
So it has to do with how high up the wall the top of the talus reaches.
As I understand it, his Wisconsin talus is only the stuff that is in the shorter sheer walls and only goes up halfway.
Mm-hmm.
But the granddaddy walls with talus going up, 3/4 of the way, 5/8 of the way up the wall.
Yep.
That's his big Spokane event. Fascinating.
I just don't know. I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into how much talus a wall produces.
I think that was,
and it's not just time.
It's all written out. His big meeting in 1927 when all the USGS folks are talking him off of this.
Yeah.
I think 3 or 4 of them are just locked onto the talus thing, including Pardee, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, there's variable climates, there's aspect issues, there's all these things.
Water availability, fracture density and the different basalt flows.
And, the narrative is he backed off the talus thing and never really included it in the later papers.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm being stubborn and saying, okay, he backed off the talus because it didn't seem to have traction. Anytime he backs off of something, I'm trying to decide, does he totally agree it's baloney? Or is he just trying to find some approaches that are going to please his critics almost, you know?
Yeah.
That's the core of it for me at this point. Oh, it's just fun as hell. Thanks for being a good sport.
Yeah. You are a true scholar, Nick. I mean, look at that.
Yeah.